Welcome. As people are coming into the Zoom and turning their cameras on, it's lovely to see smiles and waves, uh, and some new and familiar faces, always wonderful. Today we are joined by Abby Eisenberg, which I am very excited to turn things over to her. This is maybe the most jam-packed Parsha in all the Torah. I mean, I guess we can have an argument about that. And so uh, with hesitation, uh, am going to just have a brief announcement that I will add more details into the chat. If you were able to see today's reminder to join our Torah study, you will know that we are in our end of year campaign. And we, for this group in particular, are excited to provide a beautiful bookmark with the blessing for Torah study for those who make a donation. So I will quickly put that link in the chat. And I have to say, Rick, go birds. And at that, I will turn it over to you, Abby.
Okay. Welcome everyone. As Mara said, an early Shabbat Shalom. So let me share my screen to begin with, and then we'll go from there. And I'll remind everyone, I generally don't see the chat as we are learning together. I'm looking at you, I'm thinking, I'm looking at the text. So I always say if you didn't get to share a thought during the class, you can email me at abby@explorejewish.com, and I will do my best to get back to you. So it is Parashat Vayera, a difficult Parsha, Torah portion, for a few reasons. One of which is that the binding of Isaac, which might be the most dramatic and disturbing, Torah portions or stories in Genesis. Maybe not the whole Torah, I don't know, but certainly in Genesis. And so I want us to explore together today various questions that you can see on the screen and see if we can decipher various voices within even the biblical text, and various approaches to the story in the rabbinic, in the modern texts that we'll look at. I want us to think about the characters. Is there one character that seems more responsible for these happenings than the other? You might say that's obvious, but let's explore that together. And I also want us to pay attention to this story is known for not only being disturbing and dramatic, but for the elements of the story that make it dramatic, which is there's this cadence as we read it. It's sort of there's the slow cadence to the story, and there's almost like a matter of factness to the story. And the story is so dramatic, and yet the reading, when you read it, the words seem to be too simple for the drama in a way, but at the same time, I think they make room for the drama. That all said, I want us to try and look at some of the literary features that contribute to the drama. So we'll take a look at that. And to begin with, also, let's take a look at just where we are in the stories of Avraham or Abraham. We've seen a lot of drama so far, and as I'm certain many of you know, there has been a lot of, I'll keep using the word drama that leads up to this story where Abraham has been promised, and Sarah, time and again, that they will have descendants and that they will have a son that carries on this covenant, that will have descendants like the stars of the sky and the sand of the sea, and that will live in the land of Canaan. And so the story is particularly dramatic on the heels of that well, if you're reading the story for the first time, well, what's going to happen to the seed? What's going to happen to the line, the descendants of Abraham, if Isaac is actually killed in the binding? So let's read the story together, and let's see how our discussion unfolds. I added this here. We're not going to spend time on it, but as you may be familiar with the idea that Abraham is tested many times. His faith is tested. God is testing him to see perhaps if he's actually deserving of this line of promise and blessing. And this is from Maimonides. This is these are the 10 tests. So they're here. Mara will send out the PDF afterwards, but they're here for you. We're not going to spend some time on them right now. We might come back to it. Okay, so even though I'm a little congested, I'm getting over a cold, I am going to read this story out loud. I think we are going to read through verse 19. I might stop earlier than that. And you can see I did bold a few things that are worth noting. And I might stop and say a few words about those things. Okay, so we'll read the text. I will ask for your reactions after the text, and then my plan is for us to read a few Rashi commentaries together, and then to read a couple of modern commentaries, and to pause in between for discussion. So here we go. After these events, it was that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. Abraham said, Hineni, here I am. God said, pray, take your son, your only one, whom you love, Yitzchak, and go you forth to the land of Moriah, seeing, and offer him up there as an offering up on one of the mountains that I will tell you of. Abraham started early in the morning. He saddled his donkey. He took his 2 serving lads with him, and Yitzchak his son. He split wood for the offering up and arose and went to the place that God had told him of. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Abraham said to his lads, you stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad wish to go yonder. We wish to bow down and then return to you. Abraham took the wood for the offering up and placed them upon Yitzchak his son, while in his hands he took the fire and the knife. Thus the 2 of them went together. Yitzchak said to Abraham his father, he said, Father. He said, here I am, my son. He said, here are the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the offering up? Abraham said, God will see for himself to the lamb for the offering up, my son. Thus the 2 of them went together. Second time that's repeated. Second time, it's repeated once more. They came to the place that God had told him of. There Abraham built the altar and arranged the wood and bound Yitzchak his son and placed him on the altar atop the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand. He took the knife to slay his son. But God's messenger called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. Repeated phrase, Hineni. He said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad. Do not do anything to him, for now I know that you are in awe of God. You have not withheld your son, your only one, from me. Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw, here a ram caught behind in the thicket by its horns. Abraham went, he took the ram and offered it up as an offering up in place of his son. Abraham called the name of that place, God sees. As the saying is today, on God's mountain it is seen. Now God's messenger called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I swear, God's utterance, indeed, because you have done this thing, have not withheld your son, your only one. Indeed, I will bless you, bless you. I will make your seed many, yes, many, like the stars of the heavens and like the sand that is on the shore of the sea. Your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies, and all the nations of the earth shall enjoy blessing through your seed, in consequence that you listened to my voice. Abraham went to his lads. They arose and went together to Beersheba, south of Israel, southern Israel, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Okay, that's the end of this section. So thinking back, and I'll ask for your thoughts in a moment, thinking back, I want us to begin to think about, are there various voices in this text? Are there opinions in this story? Did Abraham do the right thing? Is there a critical voice in the text? Should we be critical of God? Should we be critical of Abraham? And then we'll take the conversation from there. Notice also, and I'm sure you saw my bolding, Hineni, I am here, Abraham says multiple times. And also the text says multiple times, the two of them went together. So I want to start off by asking, I'm going to ask two questions. The first is, I do want to hear your reactions to this text. I want to hear, is there a critical voice in this text, or is it just a text that sees both God and Abraham as doing the right thing, meaning God has the right to demand faith from Abraham, and Abraham shows his faith in God? Or is there any voice in the text that maybe is critical or calls into question our assumptions, perhaps, about Abraham's faith? And also, what do you make of these words? Hineni, I am here. The two of them went together, and even God sees. So I know I asked a lot of questions, so you might not remember all of them. That's
Thank
fine.
you. We have Dina, and I just want to say, there's a lot of text here, and people are not able to scroll on their own. Abby, is it
Oh, yeah.
possible to
So,
put
yes,
the
I meant, thank you so much, Mary. Yes, I meant
Thank you.
to do that. And let's make this, yes, thank you.
Thank
I'll
you.
make it accessible. Yes, 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 yes. Thank you.
And then we will go to Dina.
Okay. There you go.
Okay. Anyway, this is really a mind-blowing narrative, but the thing is that it's like has a spoiler, because God has already told Abraham that he's going to be the father of many of the nations, and as vast as the sea. So he knows beforehand that something is going to happen to prevent him from sacrificing Isaac. But then somebody did comment, and of course, this is something that really we should probably think about, is that he did have another son, even though it was not from Sarah. And of course, for him, it was Sarah's child, I guess, was the most important. Ishmael was, like, okay, he would carry his seed, so to speak, but he knew that this man, he had a feeling, I guess, that the son of Hagar was not going to be the one who would lead his people, who would be the germinator.
Yeah. Okay, Dina, just begin to wrap up, because there's a lot of questions. We're only going to take two more right now, because we're going to keep going after this. So I should have mentioned that earlier.
Thank you,
but
Dina.
After Dina, just two more.
Okay, we'll go to Richard and then Lisa.
I just want to comment on Dina, what you said first. So thank you for beginning our discussion off. First of all, you said Avraham, where's Dina? Keep your hands raised for the moment. There you are. Okay, just for the moment, and then you could lower it. You said Abraham knows. He knows. I'm not so sure he knows. Even I think that's part of the suspense that we feel. Abraham has been promised descendants, and like we see in the story, blessing the stars of the sky, like the sand of the sea. But here, everything is called into question that he's been promised. So I don't know if he knows. So that's I want to raise that as a question. And indeed, I think you highlight that even though the story says, take your son, your only one, he does have another son. It's true from the perspective of I would say from the perspective of the biblical narrator, the voice of the the voice of the storyteller here, the most important child is indeed Isaac, but indeed, as you said, he also has another son. So thank you. Okay. I think, Mara, you called on the next person, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
Richard.
Okay, great. And Richard, just keep your hand raised for right now because I want to be able to see
Okay.
you're talking.
I don't understand why Abraham didn't contest with God like he did with Sodom and Gomorrah, that there were righteous people. His son was righteous. It was innocent. How could he just take his son and slaughter him without opposing that? It
Great.
just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. So that's the question. That I honestly don't think there's a completely satisfactory answer to that question. But we will, I hope, I plan for us to read two modern commentaries that I think they shed some, they give us some context. They sort of deepen our understanding of the Pshat, the Torah text itself, without the layer of rabbinic commentaries. And I think they, at least for me, they help me understand the story, even though they don't directly give me an answer to that question. So yeah, that is the big question, a huge question that people have been asking for generations. Thank you. Okay, I saw Lisa, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And Lisa, please say how we should pronounce your name.
Lisa.
Lisa, okay, good.
What stands out to me in this is 19:5, where it says that where Abraham says to his lads that stay here with the donkey while I and the lad will go until there. We will prostrate ourselves and we will return.
Okay, can you say a little bit more? What about that is having an impact
We'll
on
return to you. To me, that tells me that Abraham already knows he's coming back with Isaac.
Okay. Do you think it's possible that he wants to maybe reassure the lads, the boys? Okay, hold on one second. Lisa, can you keep your hand raised for a moment?
Yes.
Thank you. Where's Lisa? Okay, there she is. Thank you. Lisa, do you think, and this is really a bigger question for everyone, but do you think it's possible that he wants to reassure these, let's say, young teens who are with him? Wouldn't they be alarmed if he said, hey, my son and I were going over there, but only I'm going to come back? Isn't that a way to reassure those young boys with him?
I think for me, it speaks of Abraham's belief in Hashem. That yes, he's asked for this thing, but in somewhere back in his mind, he knows that Hashem will provide. I mean, that's what it kind of says to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's take two more. I saw Andrea as the next hand, and I don't know who was after Andrea. But we'll take Andrea and then we'll go from there.
You just muted Andrea. We'll ask you to unmute again.
Okay. I was going to say something very similar to that, but I think it's in more places than just that one. He says, Abraham, I'm going to put you to a test. Or he says he's going to put Abraham to a test. We assume the test is whether or not he's going to sacrifice Isaac, but the test could be whether or not he has enough faith in God to know that God's going to push him to the edge and not ask him to sacrifice. And he said many times, the one that I forgot who that was, it Lisa pointed out, is one. Another time Isaac asked, well, where's the lamb? And Abraham said, God's going to provide the lamb because he knows. I think we're making a huge assumption as to what the test is.
That is, I think you and Lisa have just convinced me of something that I was not convinced of before. Meaning, I've always read this part of the text. And Andrea, can you keep your hand raised for a moment? I've always read those parts of the text as reassurance, but you and Lisa have deepened my sense that maybe there's a different way to look at them. Maybe they really are examples of Abraham's faith. Okay, so thank you for that. Okay, one more, and then we're going to read a few Rashi commentaries and then a few modern commentaries.
We'll go to Jennifer, and it's so exciting to see so much energy around these texts. I'm so sorry we're not going to get to everyone, but Jennifer, if you're there, you should be able to unmute.
Oh my God. Hello, hello, hi, thank you, Boker Tov or Hatzavayim Tov or Erev Tov, wherever you may be. Okay, so my question was this, and I've heard many different interpretations on this, on the Akeidah. Maybe, perhaps, Abraham misinterpreted what Hashem was telling him about sacrificing Yitzhak. Maybe he misunderstood, and maybe Hashem didn't tell him to actually try to sacrifice his son at the altar.
Well, what's the alternative? What are you saying is what was he misinterpreting? What was he supposed to do?
That was the question I was asking. I'm just telling you, I've heard different interpretations on that. I must have heard at least 20 different ones. So maybe it wasn't like he misunderstood what Hashem was telling him. And I just wanted to note that Hagar wasn't so down and out trodden. She was actually Pharaoh's daughter, wasn't she?
Okay, so Hagar, the mother of Ishmael. I'm not sure at the moment. I'm not sure the connection between Hagar and this story, just in a very direct way. But let me respond to the question. According to the Midrash, according to rabbinic interpretation, she may have been Pharaoh's daughter.
I studied this.
Okay, I actually haven't seen that Midrash, but certainly most definitely possible.
She was enamored by Abraham. He attracted many different nations.
Yeah.
He was and carried himself.
Okay. So Jennifer, I'm just gonna. Let me just wrap up, and I want us to keep moving on so that other people have the opportunity to share also. But yeah, so let's see. Building off of your question, let's see how we can reinterpret or perhaps see Abraham's motivations in different ways. Okay, so thank you everyone for sharing so far. I know there's a lot in the chat and out loud. So I want us to take a look at the classical medieval commentator Rashi, just a couple of brief narrative, very short commentaries, so that we can maybe deepen our sense of how this story, the primary way that the story has been understood over the years. And I think it really, I hope it deepens our sense of the characters a little bit. Okay, so the verse that Rashi, oops, this is supposed to say 22. Let me just double check. I want it to be right. Yes, okay. So this particular Rashi is on verse 2. And this is the verse where God says, take Isaac, take your only son, and offer him up. The Hebrew v'ha'ali. Rashi notes there that the verse doesn't specifically say in Hebrew, shechatehu. It doesn't use the Hebrew root for slaughter, because God did not want, as some of you are saying, to slaughter him, but only to bring him up to the mountain in order to prepare him as a burnt offering. So the idea is Abraham is being tested. Will he prepare his son, not necessarily kill him? After Abraham had brought him up, God said, take him down. Okay, so very similar to what some of you have said so far. Rashi is echoing the sense in Jewish tradition that we can't possibly see Abraham. It's very difficult for us. If we want to have the Torah as our sacred literature and these characters as characters that we want to learn from, it's very difficult to see Abraham as someone willing to sacrifice his son. And so Rashi in rabbinic tradition is offering, well, if we look closely at the word, especially of that directive from God, if we look at the words used, it's not actually slaughter that God wanted, it's the preparation for offering up. One might say, though, that the word, you might have heard of the olah offering. The word olah is used in many different contexts as an actual offering. So I would say this is a drash rather than a pshat, but it still might be comforting for many. And what I mean by drash rather than pshat is we're reading into the text something that we so want to see. We don't want to see Abraham is willing to sacrifice his son. It's easier for us to see him as someone who is willing to offer up his son, to bring the son up. And building off of what both Lisa and Andrea said earlier, he was willing to do it, but he knew somewhere in his mind that he wasn't going to have to go through with it. Okay, let's read one more. Okay, this is on verse 6. The two of them walked together. I mentioned earlier that there are a few phrases, and this is one of them where I think I would suggest that from a pshat, from the perspective of the most straightforward perspective in the text itself, I would say that there's irony in this phrase. The two of them walked together. They weren't actually together emotionally, perhaps spiritually. I mean, we can only imagine Abraham sort of seems actually in his own world. And what is Yitzchak thinking? He's kind of wondering what's going on. And then he asks his father in the story, where are we going? We're going to sacrifice, but where's the animal? So in a way, it seems like one might say that Vayelchu shnehem yachdav, the two of them walked together, maybe seems ironic. Maybe they were together physically, but were they together emotionally? Okay, so Rashi's going to say, yes, they were together. Abraham, who knew that he was going to slaughter his son, went voluntarily with joy. Okay, different from some of the voices we've heard so far in the room today, like Isaac, who did not sense this matter. So I want to suggest underneath this short commentary is the question that I have raised. How is it possible that they were actually together? What does that mean that they were together? Abraham, on the one hand, was perhaps in his own world ready to offer his son to God. And on the other hand, Isaac must have been having these questions, as we see in the text itself, and perhaps a strong emotional reaction. And Rashi and rabbinic tradition comes to share with us that how are they together? Each in their own ways felt joy. Abraham was, in fact, ready to slaughter his son, okay? And here the language is lishchot. So I want us to begin to see in rabbinic tradition two different perspectives. On the one hand, Abraham was ready to slaughter his son. On the other hand, there's a part of rabbinic tradition that does not want to see that. Here we see he was ready to do it. He was joyous about it. He was joyous and ready to serve God. And this speaks to the gentleman who asked the question earlier, how could this be? Why isn't Abraham protesting? Isaac also felt joy. Why? There's a debate. There's different understandings of how old Isaac was. But if we imagine, I think based on the most straightforward reading of the story, that he was a young boy, he was a young kid, and he was didn't know what was happening, and he felt a sense of carefreeness or joy. Okay, so I wanted us to see these texts because on the one hand, one rabbinic perspective says, as we've heard in the room, no, Abraham was not about to slaughter his son. He was just ready to show his allegiance to God. And on the other hand, he was ready to do it. He felt joyous about it. And even Isaac, even though he asked the question, where are we going? Where's the animal? He also felt a sense of, they were together in their emotional state. He also felt a sense of joy. Okay, so let's pause here as we're continuing to process all the different elements of the story, the characters, the different readings of the story, the different voices, perhaps in the biblical text itself, and also the different rabbinic voices. So I see the first, and Jennifer, I'm gonna allow someone else to speak for now. So the first three hands I see were Maya, Jack, and Julius. So we'll start. Oh, Maya, Susie, I think. Actually, I don't know. Mara, do you know?
We'll start with Maya, and then
okay.
Yeah, my hand was up from a previous question.
Okay. So
so
yes.
I
Maya,
wanted to.
if you're not sure of your question, feel free
I
to
know,
put
and I know that the question is that
Okay.
did Abraham eat? There was an assumption that Abraham knew that God would ask him to offer up Isaac, but did he? Like when he said we'll both come back, did Abraham? It's an assumption that Abraham knew that God would ask him to offer up Isaac. Yitzhak.
I'm not sure I understand.
It's not a question. It's like a question. It's like me saying maybe God, Abraham, truly believed that both he and Yitzhak would return, that God wouldn't pull this test on him.
Okay, so I think what you're saying indeed is something that I think you're sort of in Andrea and Lisa, forgive me for singling you out, but you're both, what you said really stands out to me. You're in the Andrea and Lisa camp, okay? It sounds like you see that indeed based on some of the phrases in the text where
It's
Abraham
not that it did. I'm putting forward an interpretation that I did see put up that Abraham, there wasn't that Abraham thought that God would test him and stuff, that there wasn't anything deeper to him saying to his servants that both he and Yitzhak could return. He thought that maybe he thought it would be just a noble sacrifice, but God would bring the lamb to him.
Okay, yeah, I think I understand. I'm gonna comment and then give other people the opportunity to share a little bit. It sounds to me like you were saying something similar to what Lisa and Andrea were saying, that indeed there are hints in the text that Abraham has faith, not that his faith has to be shown by sacrificing his son, but in fact, faith that even though God was commanding him, it seemed, to offer up his son, it wasn't actually to kill his son. And there are hints in the text about that. That's what I'm hearing. Let's
That's not what I said.
Okay, so Maya, we have to move on. You're welcome to put in the chat a little bit more. I'm sorry that I'm not. Okay, no problem. You're welcome to email me. I'm sorry I'm not understanding you clearly right now, but I want to give other people the chance to share. Okay, so Susie.
Thank you. I'm going to take a small step to the right.
Okay.
And say that because we are so far removed in time and generations from the people we are reading about in the Torah, and we have the Torah, which is a great gift to us, I'm not sure I would use the word test, but in a way it's a test for us today. Okay. And that's what we're doing. Struggling with our own faith and what we need God to be or what we want God to be, and judging these people through our eyes today. We need this as much as these situations happening needed to happen. And I don't have an answer to the questions we're talking about today because I don't feel I can answer. I don't know God. I'm struggling with my own sense of faith and my own place in the world. But this is remarkable, and I value these classes so much for this reason exactly. So thank you.
Me too. Susie, it's so interesting. I was talking to a colleague yesterday about this text, and I was saying, this is such a difficult text. And he said, maybe we just say, this is not a text from which we are going to learn. Maybe not every text is there for us to learn. And I find myself, I think I would have said that maybe at other points in my own journey. But like you, I also see this I wouldn't say as a test, but I struggle with this text. And I'm not willing to say for myself, there's nothing for me to learn here. So I do think that it's worth the struggle. And if we think of these texts as our sacred texts, they're here to share something with us. And that's what we're doing today, trying to glean out for ourselves what we're supposed to learn. So thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, Jack, I think that is Jack Halmanson. I believe that is your name.
I looked at this a little differently.
Okay.
I see this as Abraham's ability by saying, Anani, I am here for you. He's not only saying it as a father to his son, but he also says it to God. And without hurting anybody's feelings, he has to confront this, and his personality has to show what he is as a person. I frankly don't think he would ever have killed his son. He says over and over that when Isaac says, Father, he says, I am here for you as a father. And a father won't kill his son. And when God says, where are you? He says, I am here for you too. Now the decision of what he has to do depends on his personality, which he really never has to confront because God lets him off the hook.
Okay, that's interesting. I guess the thing that you said that had such an impact that is really staying with me is that it sounds like you too, it would be hard for you to see that Abraham was actually willing to sacrifice his son. And
the title of this is the Akeidah, which is the binding of Isaac.
Binding, right?
This very well could, after all, Isaac is no little kid. He's 38, 39 years old. His old father would have a little trouble really binding him with something without his permission. But after this incident, you don't hear from Abraham anymore. He takes off with Keturah, has another family, and Isaac becomes the patriarch.
Okay, so you could go ahead and wrap up.
Well, as I see this, if this was entitled the final test of Abraham's faith, it isn't. The binding of Isaac is the binding of Isaac to to Adonai. And he's now willing to take on the job that Abraham had started. Abraham then leaves the picture.
Okay, so I would say, first of all, there are a few things I want to say, and then we're going to read a couple more texts. First of all, this is considered the last test of Abraham in rabbinic tradition. And also in rabbinic tradition, our ancestors have given the name of the story as the Akeidah, the binding. We call it that. I think certainly we wouldn't call it the attempt at killing or the request to kill. That's too harsh. I want to also say that I do think the pshat, the straightforward sense that we get from the text, is that Yitzchak is a young boy. It is true that based on rabbinic calculations in the Midrash, Yitzchak is older than that. I think that is drash. That is, we don't have to necessarily, that's not something where we have to believe. That is one perspective on the text. It is not the pshat. I don't think it's the pshat. It's not the straightforward sense that we get just from reading the text itself. Okay, so, but I'm here, different kinds of comments today, and almost everyone has looked for ways in the text or in rabbinic tradition to see that Abraham, he couldn't possibly have wanted to sacrifice his son. So that's how I hear, Jack, that's what I'm hearing from you. Okay, I want us to take a look at, given the time, I want us to take a look at, I'm going to summarize what we're going to do. I'm going to try to do two things. So this is, I gave a lot of background here. There's an article in the Torah.com from Professor Diana Edelman, who talks about, and this speaks to the question that we heard earlier about Abraham as a character that is defiant or that argues or disputes. And Diana Edelman, Professor Edelman, makes the point that this final test that God had to, or the character of God had to go to extremes, because up until now, Abraham was constantly defying God's wishes and was constantly arguing with God. So let's just read this, and then I'll add a little bit more. The pattern in Abram's life repeats itself several times. I'm not going to read every word. Abram responds with either disobedience or doubt. With the birth of Isaac, God has now delivered on the promises made to Abraham of offspring, blessings, and a good reputation. God then explicitly tests Abraham with a command to bind and sacrifice Isaac. Although Abraham had questioned God multiple times in the past, now he does not. God is apparently convinced that Abraham would have killed Isaac with his knife-wielding. Sorry, let me read that again. God is apparently convinced that Abraham would have killed Isaac with his knife-wielding hand had he not heard the heavenly voice of the divine messenger stopping him. He has proven his faith to God and finally demonstrated his faith. And you can see here above, hopefully you'll see the document later when Mara sends out the PDF, or you can scroll through now for those who are in the document, that when Abraham leaves his birthplace, God tells him to leave from Ur rather than from Haran. And just so everyone sees what Professor Edelman is talking about, God says, leave from here, or even though Abraham is here, and Diana Edelman suggests, Abraham is back in Ur, even though he went with his father to Haran. Whether or not that's compelling, let's see what else she says. When God separates, when Abraham separates from Lot, God promised all the land to Abram, but he still gives Lot some land. And Professor Edelman sees that as not completely following God's wishes. And even with the case of Avimelech's palace, when he gives Sarah to the king, he doesn't trust that God will take care of her, and feels he has to negotiate with the local king. And finally, with Sodom, and I hope you'll look up this article because I'm just summarizing it briefly, with Sodom and Amorah, as was said earlier on in our time together today, it's really powerful that that Abram goes to bat on behalf of all these people. Maybe there are righteous people in the city of Sodom. Please don't kill them when God says he's going to destroy the city. And yet here in this story, he is willing to sacrifice his son. And in fact, Professor Edelman doesn't give us another way, a drash or a different interpretation, or like many of us, she doesn't have us see the story from the perspective of maybe Abram did not want to kill his son. She sees this as the final test where Abram is expected to finally show that after defiant act, he's finally expected to show that he's willing to demonstrate his faith for God. Okay, it might be a hard modern perspective for us to hear, but I want to put it out there as something to consider. And then I also want to share with you a very sort of a literary / a modern literary academic perspective from Rabbi Dr. Tzemach Yora, also on the Torah.com. So I invite you to take a look at that, where Rabbi Yora says that in fact, it might be there is a layer in the story, perhaps, even if we see, and this I'm adding, even if we see the Torah as divinely inspired or as divinely given, there could still be human historical layers of storytelling within the Torah. And because of the last few verses of the text, where it seems like you might wonder, where the heck is Isaac? Abraham returned to his lads. They arose and went together. Abraham stayed in Beersheba. And as Jack said earlier, even though Isaac becomes the next forefather, the stories end up focusing on him. Where is he at the end of the story? And many of you have probably heard, perhaps more poignantly, where is Sarah? Sarah dies at the beginning of the next Torah portion. As rabbinic tradition said, the story was traumatic. The events behind the story would have been so traumatic for her that she just gave up. The idea that Isaac would have been sacrificed is so horrific that we don't read about her again. And so back to Isaac himself and where he went. Rabbi Yora says, Isaac's sacrifice, again, like Professor Edelman, in the Pshat, is meant to demonstrate the importance of fearing God, and that trumps any importance of Isaac as a person. Where has Isaac disappeared to? it would seem obvious that something happened to Isaac, something involving a knife and a burning fire. So there are multiple perspectives on this text. Perhaps the most straightforward sense is that even if we think about the biblical story as having layers, perhaps it is possible that there was an original layer of the story where Abraham actually did, it's hard to even say, heaven forbid, kill his son. As we've seen in rabbinic tradition, and for us today, I think most of us here really struggle with that. And we have to, for us, relying on rabbinic tradition and the heart of rabbinic tradition, that Abraham did not actually want to or plan to, and God didn't plan to sacrifice his son. That is perhaps the most comforting, as well as going back to what Andrea and Lisa pointed out earlier on, that perhaps there are hints in the text that Abraham wasn't willing to actually sacrifice his son. So I want us to really walk away with multiple voices, multiple perspectives, including our own. And as I don't know if it was Dina, as it was someone else, it wasn't Dina. As someone was saying, maybe this is a story, and maybe someone will just chime in with who this was. This really is a story, not perhaps as whoever said, the participant said, I believe it was Susie, a text that tests us, or a text that invites us to really struggle with where we are and how we understand faith today. And I hope you'll also read the stunning Grace Paley poem at the end of this about fathers and how we see fathers. And there's, yeah, I'll end there. The rest of the texts are just for me. So I know we have to end. It's 11:17. So I'll wish you all just rich experiences with reading and interpreting this text in ways that are meaningful and resonant for you today. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you all. Shabbat Shalom. We hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.